Norfolk County, the League of Women Voters of Needham, Brookline, Hingham, Norwood, Sharon Stoughton, Wellesley, and Westwood Walpole Dedham. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan, multi-issue organization that encourages informed, active participation of citizens in government. The League does not support or oppose candidates or political parties. No League members involved in this forum, including the planners, moderator, question monitor, and timekeeper, are endorsing any of these candidates. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are holding this forum as a Zoom webinar. Within this format, we're doing our best to emulate a live forum. We are also subject to possible technical glitches, and we ask you, the audience, to bear with us and to especially understand that the candidates may experience sound or screen issues totally beyond their or our control. In Massachusetts, sheriffs are elected within the 14 counties every 6 years. But this year, Norfolk County is electing its sheriff for a 2-year term because of a vacancy that occurred midterm in 2018. The governor appointed the current sheriff, but the law requires a sheriff be elected at the next state election, which brings us to 2020. The 3 candidates tonight are running in the Democratic primary to serve a 2-year term. The winner will face the Republican candidate, the current appointed sheriff, Jerry McDermott, who is running unopposed in the Republican primary. What is the role of the Norfolk County Sheriff? We'll learn more about that from the candidates, but for a baseline, the Norfolk County Sheriff is a state office within the Department of Corrections, elected by the voters of Norfolk County. The principal responsibility is management and operation of the Norfolk County House of Correction in Dedham, where the inmate population has ranged from 400 to 700, with fewer during the pandemic, and sentences are generally not more than 2.5 years. The other area the Sheriff's Office oversees, separate from the House of Correction, is civil process. The majority of civil process service is delivery of legal notices where mail alone notice is not considered sufficient, such as serving subpoenas and following up on failures to appear in court. The Sheriff's Office has approximately 350 employees and an annual budget in the range of $35 million. Tonight, we'll hear from the 3 candidates running in the Democratic primary. Our moderator for tonight is Vedna Haywood. She is a member of the League of Women Voters of Plymouth and is on the board of the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts. Vedna will lead us through this forum. Welcome, Vedna.
Thank you, Karen. The candidates have been fully apprised of the format and ground rules. For the benefit of the audience, I will give an overview. Each candidate will briefly introduce themselves in ballot order. I will then ask them questions in random order. Each candidate will answer all of the questions. The response time for questions is 1 minute. Rebuttals for individual questions will not be allowed. There will be a rebuttal round midway through the forum when the candidates will have 1 minute to clarify or rebut earlier comments. The questions come from a variety of sources, prepared in advance by the League of Women Voters, collected in advance from the public via email, and from our live Zoom audience. During the event, the Zoom audience may use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can ask a question at any time in the Q&A box. We will ask at least 2 questions from the Zoom audience. A League member is responsible for monitoring these questions and will pass them on to me. She may take several questions on the same topic to form a composite question. We will finish with the 90-second closing statements in reverse ballot order. We will start with the 30-second opening statement from each candidate. Mr. Coughlin, please introduce yourself and remember to unmute.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jimmy Coughlin. I'm a lifelong resident of Dedham. I'm married with 4 children. I attended Dedham Public Schools, earned a bachelor's degree from UMass Amherst and a master's degree in criminal justice from Anna Maria College. Spent 29 years on the state police, retired as a detective captain, held supervisory managerial positions, The sheriff should be a public safety professional, and I believe I meet those qualifications. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. McDermott?
Good evening, and thank you to Karen and the League of Women Voters. My name is Patrick McDermott. I'm from Quincy, where I live with my wife, Attorney Tracy Wilson, and two teenage children, Alana and Adam. I went to St. Paul's Choir School in Cambridge, BC High, Boston College, and Suffolk University Law School. I'm an attorney, a former city councilor in Quincy, and for the last 18 years, I've served as your Register of Probate. I'm running for Norfolk County Sheriff because I believe that it's time for the Sheriff's Office to evolve beyond the jail to better serve the people in Norfolk County, and I look forward to sharing that vision with you tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Phelan? Mr. Phelan?
Bill, you need to unmute. There we
Oh,
go.
I'm sorry. Am I unmuted now?
You can start.
Oh, thank you. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this important forum today. I'm Bal Phelan, three-term mayor of Quincy and a progressive reform candidate for Norfolk County Sheriff. The county's recidivism rate is nearly 50%, and the jail is needlessly filled with many who are suffering from untreated mental health problems and substance use disorders. Norfolk County can do better. My detailed platform outlines proven programs, and I have the experience to deliver on this platform, and I look forward to the discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the questions. We will start with Mr. Phelan. Question number 1. What makes you the best candidate for Sheriff of Norfolk County?
I think, number one, my passion for helping people. It was instilled in me by my parents. My brothers and sisters have that same passion, and I just believe in helping people. Number two, I'm a reform candidate. My public service as a mayor, I was an agent of change. I'm not afraid to take tough stances, and I stand up to powers when I think it's necessary. So I really believe I'm a reform candidate as well, and my experience shows that. Number three, I'm very good at budgets. I administered a $250 million budget as the mayor of the city of Quincy, complex, and I think that that experience as well helps me as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Mr. McDermott, what makes you the best candidate for Sheriff of Norfolk County?
Well, this year, more than any other year, we need somebody with bold vision for the office of sheriff. I bring to the Norfolk County Sheriff's Office a breadth of unique experiences and community-based work, both as an elected official and in my volunteer work, including serving as past president of the Bar Association for Norfolk County, past president of the Massachusetts Registers of Probate, and the past president of my local Rotary Club in Quincy, which is an international service organization focused on health and well-being. As a lawyer and former prosecutor, I understand the multiple forces at play both pre and post conviction. Having served in a countywide elected office in the judiciary in the Registry of Probate for 18 years, I have extensive knowledge on how the legal system works, and I bring an extensive network of community and county-based connections and resources to the role of sheriff. Resources that will not only help inmates in the House of Corrections, but will also help individuals across the county avoid entering or returning to the House of Corrections.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McDermott. Mr. Coughlin, the same question.
I spent 29 years in law enforcement. I retired as a detective captain. I am a public safety professional. The sheriff should be a public safety professional. I will bring instant credibility to the office of the sheriff. I've worked with both corrections, law enforcement agencies, and the courts. I've testified in district court, superior court. I've been subpoenaed. I know the system. I also have had all the training that the corrections officers had, and then some. I understand the training. I will be all about the operations of the sheriff's office, which will keep everybody accountable. It will promote public safety, keep the correction officer and the inmates both safe. I believe that this office needs a public safety professional, and I am that person.
Thank you, Mr. Coughlin. For the next question, we will start with Mr. McDermott. If elected, what are your top 3 priorities for the next 2 years?
Well, I think for the first and foremost thing, the sheriff's office has an opportunity and a responsibility to evolve past the narrow focus of prisons and corrections. The role of sheriff must be a broader focus on public safety, and I will make that a priority. Working to connect residents of Norfolk County to necessary services, opportunities, and resources that make them feel safe in all their areas of their lives. I envision a sheriff's office whose primary role is that of the county's chief public safety officer. And that vision includes not only a properly and efficiently run correction system, but implementation of a holistic approach to addressing the core issues that undermine public safety. We need to take a 4-pronged approach: corrections, rehabilitation, reentry, and community outreach. Those 4 initiatives are going to be my focal point over the next 2 years and beyond as I serve as sheriff in Norfolk County.
Thank you, Mr. McDermott. Mr. Coughlin, if elected, what are your top 3 priorities for the next 2 years?
My first priority would be to look at, I would house female prisoners in Norfolk County Jail because we have a discriminatory issue here. If you're an 18-year-old male, you get housed at Norfolk County Jail. If you're an 18-year-old female, you go out to MCI Framingham, the oldest state prison in the country. Number 2, I would look at regional lockups. It would take off strains with local departments who don't have the resources in the facilities to watch people who are apprehended over the weekends. Thirdly, I would institute a tablet program because that would prevent drugs from being brought into the prison. Inmates could use tablets to speak with email their families and look at books and further their education. And lastly, I would maintain a separate mental health unit at the jail.
Thank you, Mr. Coughlin. The same question, Mr. Phelan. If elected, what are your top 3 priorities for the next 2 years? Mr. Phelan, unmute. Mr. Phelan, if you can unmute, please.
Mr. Phelan, you're still on mute.
How's that?
Much better. Yes.
I am so sorry. I've been clicking it, but it just doesn't seem to work. But first and foremost, thank you for the question. I'd be a champion of racial equity within our criminal justice system. 8% of those of people in Norfolk County are people of color, yet 28% of the inmates in Norfolk County House of Correction are people of color. Bail amounts for people of color are higher than their white counterparts. I'd be a champion of bail reform, taking a look at mandatory sentencing and eliminating some mandatory sentencing. Secondly, recidivism. I have a 30-point plan that provides for a continuum of care, not just during incarceration, but before incarceration, during incarceration, and then upon re-entry into society, with programs that will work. We know that educational programs work. We know that substance use disorder treatment works. I would focus my priorities on that area. Thank you.
Edna, you're muted.
Sorry. Moving on to question number 3. We will start with Mr. Coughlin. If elected, what are your plans to reduce recidivism at the Norfolk County House of Correction? How would you ensure that those who are released have the best chance for successful reentry to their communities and avoid repeat incarceration?
Well, reducing recidivism to prevent somebody from re-offending, I believe, is to create more opportunities than obstacles. They need support. So one of the major priorities would be the reentry programs. We need more programs. We need to collaborate better with our public and private partners. We need to get more beds at shelters and halfway houses. We need to work better with our community college and our vocational trades to get people jobs. I believe that employment is one of the most important things that's going to prevent somebody from reoffending. And that is because that's going to build self-esteem. They have something to look for. But we need to be out in the community. The sheriff needs to be out in the community creating these partnerships and doing a better job with trades and schools and treatment programs.
Thank you, Mr. Coughlin. Same, we will go on to Mr. Phelan. Question: if elected, what are your plans to reduce recidivism at Norfolk County House of Correction? And how would you ensure that those who are released have the best chance for successful reentry to their communities and avoid repeat incarceration? Please unmute. Okay, great.
Unmuted?
Yes.
Good. Thank you for the question. You know, as I stated, I have a full platform on my website. I hope people take the time to look at it. But with regards to reentry, it actually begins before reentry. I develop a step-down program and begin to plant the seeds of hope for individuals who are about to leave. I agree with Mr. Coughlin. Certainly, housing is important. But it's not just housing. They have to have supportive services. When I was mayor in Quincy, I had a 10-year plan nationally recognized to end chronic homelessness. We did that by providing permanent housing with wraparound services, counseling for mental health issues, making sure people remain on their medications, and substance use disorder counseling. I also would like to talk a little bit about all the fees and fines that these inmates find themselves plagued with and practical solutions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Same question, Mr. McDermott. If elected, what are your plans to reduce recidivism at the Norfolk County House of Correction? And how would you ensure that those who are released have the best chance for successful reentry to their communities and avoid repeat incarceration?
Well, the first and foremost thing is we need to put together a metric-based system in reducing recidivism. I'll do a stem to stern review of all the current programs and staffing to make sure they're adequately addressing recidivism issues. We need to put together innovative and cutting-edge approaches to addressing mental health, homelessness, substance abuse, domestic violence, and criminal behavior. We need to partner with nonprofits, faith-based institutions, and multiple government programs. I see vocational training through strategic partnerships with culinary arts programs, unions, which I have been blessed with many endorsements. Every business manager said they will partner with me to make sure there's jobs available for our folks when they go back into society. We need alternate careers in technology, education, GED, community college partnerships, new skills development. These are the things that will cut down on recidivism and make sure that these folks have hope.
Thank you, Ms. McDermott. Moving on to question number 4. Mr. Phelan, do you agree? I'm sorry, I believe we're, yes, yeah, question number 4, Mr. Phelan. Do you agree with the measures that are being taken with regard to the Norfolk County House of Correction in response to the current pandemic, and how do you see these playing out in the long term?
Yeah, you know, I would never criticize anybody for doing their best to keep the inmates safe under the current situation. And I'm sure that there's standardized regulations and procedures that are being followed. I can only say that if I am elected as sheriff, that I will make sure that we have health professionals guiding us for best practices, and we make sure that each and every individual that comes into that facility complies with those guidelines strictly. You know, it's not just the guidelines, it's overseeing the guidelines and ensuring that everybody is complying and fulfilling their duties, because we have all an obligation to one another. So I would not criticize what's going on now, but I would make sure that was a top priority, keeping people safe. There's no bigger priority as sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Mr. Coughlin, Same question, I'll repeat it. Do you agree with the measures that are being taken with regard to the Norfolk County House of Correction in response to the current pandemic? And how do you see these playing out in the long term?
I don't know what the procedure is now, but I do know they have a low COVID count. Obviously, it's a very serious issue. As sheriff, I would, number one, if you have an outbreak, you have to first look at the classification of the inmate in regards to eventual, if you're going to let them out because of the pandemic getting too bad. But first, you separate them, you keep your facility clean. And then, you bring them to the medical unit. And then if it becomes a full-blown outbreak, I'm not against looking at non-violent criminal offenders and having them released on a bracelet program or something like that if it becomes that serious. But you have to look at each, violent criminal offenders, you can't let them out because that's you're not promoting public safety. They're violent people. You have to keep them incarcerated. But those who are nonviolent criminal offenders, if you had to, I'd look at letting them go out on a bracelet program.
Thank you, Mr. Coughlin. The same question, Mr. McDermott, do you want me to repeat it?
No, I got it. So basically COVID-19, a public health crisis requires us to take extraordinary precautions with our staff and our inmate population. Obviously, COVID-19 doesn't discriminate either inside or outside the House of Correction. I have unique experience dealing with this. Since March 16th, I've had to shut down a courthouse, keep it open to the public virtually. I've had to make sure that the correct staffing levels are in place. Those are the kind of things we're going to have to do going forward in the sheriff's office. We need to make sure that there's access to quality health care for our inmates and our staff. Part of keeping people in the House of Correction safe is making sure everyone in the county is safe. So we'll put forth public health awareness programs over the next, as long as this pandemic continues. And basically it comes down to, we need an expanded vision for public health as it relates to public safety for all of the residents in Norfolk County.
Thank you, Mr. McDermott. We are on to our fifth question. This question comes from our Zoom audience. I will start with Mr. McDermott. If elected, how would you work with the unions at Norfolk County House of Corrections, especially settling contract issues and disputes?
So I've had a unique opportunity to work in the trial court with our unions. We have a full union shop at the trial court. One of the things I'm blessed with coming into this election is the full endorsement of the Norfolk County Corrections Officers Union, as well as the non-corrections officers union, which makes up the teachers, the therapists, and the nurses. So I think they already see my vision and they see the responsible role that I will take. But they also know, because of my background, that I'm not afraid to take on tough issues. We're going to have to negotiate those contracts, but I do so in a spirit of cooperation. These are the men and women that put their lives on the line every day, and they're the ones that are going to be moving forward, helping our inmate population get the rehabilitation they deserve and focus on their reentry. So I'm going to be a responsible manager, make sure our contracts are negotiated fairly and equitably, and we're going to make sure we do a great job with our unions.
Thank you, Mr. McDermott. Mr. Phelan, same question. If elected, how would you work with the unions at the Norfolk County House of Corrections, especially settling contract issues and disputes?
At arm's length, obviously, and fairly, as always. I mean, that's certainly appropriate. It's important to point out that correction officers' jobs are very, very difficult jobs. That's a big union within the jail. They actually have a suicide rate of 2 times that of a police officer. They experience very difficult circumstances and should be paid appropriately for their services. But it's also important to point out that they have to be and must be properly trained. So training would be a big part of any and all negotiations. Implicit bias training, diversity training, de-escalation training, all part of the negotiations, and repeated training and certification. So, I mean, I look forward to working cooperatively and also taking a different approach and a different look at the job of a correction officer.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Mr. Coughlin, same question. If elected, how would you work with the unions at the Norfolk County House of Correction, especially settling contract issues and disputes?
I would work directly with the union. I was a member of the state police union for 18 years. I believe in unions. I believe in corrections officers. I believe in contract bargaining, timely contract bargaining. I would sit at the table. I believe that they deserve everything they get in a contract. It's extremely difficult job. They're not paid a lot of money. They need better training. They need better equipment. I would sit down with the unions and get them everything they need. I am endorsed by McCUFA, which is the Mass State Correction Officers Union. I'm endorsed by the MPA, Mass Cop. I'm endorsed by the state probation officers. So yes, I'm very pro-union and pro-contract bargaining. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coughlin. Next question, question number 6. We will start with you, Mr. Coughlin. Is it fair to say that recently there is an increased awareness and concern about racial and/or implicit bias with regard to law enforcement? If elected, what measures would you implement to ensure that all inmates are treated without bias?
Well, racial discrimination, racial profiling, it's unacceptable. It would be written into the policy of procedure. You would be punished, if not fired, for violating those policies. There's no room in today's society for any racial inequality whatsoever. I wouldn't stand for it. I would have very strong policies and procedures. I would have increased training and racial sensitivity training, use of force training, de-escalation training, communication skills. These will be the best trained corrections officers in the state, and absolutely there's no room for any racial inequality.
Thank you, Mr. Coughlin. Mr. Phelan, same question. Is it fair to say that that recently there's been an increased awareness and concern about racial and/or implicit bias with regard to law enforcement? If elected, what measures would you implement to ensure that all inmates are treated without bias?
Well, like Jimmy, I'd certainly institute training changes and repetitive training in terms of implicit bias and diversity. I would also create a process whereby inmates would be able to participate in and have an individual within my staff be assigned to creating that process, and any type of racial concerns that inmates have would be addressed in that process. It would be also something that was completely out in the open and known to the community, and I'd be reporting those as known to the community. I've already said I'm a supporter of bail reform and the reduction of certain crimes as mandatory sentencing. I'd make sure that my staff reflected the population of inmates, not necessarily the population of the community in Norfolk County, and more, quite frankly.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Mr. McDermott, the same question. Would you like me to repeat it?
I think I have it. So obviously racism is a critical issue affecting us. And, this really has been a 400-year evolution since the institution of slavery. It's been a public outcry that racism remains pervasive in our society, in our education system, in our workforce, in housing, and yes, in our criminal justice system for sure, and in our correction system. We can't talk about public safety if the public doesn't feel safe, and that includes our inmate population. We need to have those real, raw, and relevant conversations about racism with our inmates and with the population. And as sheriff, I plan on declaring racism a public health and safety crisis. And I want to lead the charge in instituting change wherever needed. We need to seek out and focus on perspectives of diverse ethnic communities within the jail and outside the jail, and our immigrant populations across Norfolk County when developing policies and programming within the sheriff's office. And I will make sure, first and foremost, that we hire a chief diversity officer, as we did in the trial court.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McDermott. I'm just making sure that just want to make sure, Mr. I want to make sure that I haven't skipped. Mr. Coughlin, you've answered this question. Just making sure that I haven't skipped anyone in terms of the question being asked. Okay, so we are now on to question number 7. We will start with you, Mr. Phelan. If elected, what steps would you take to make the Sheriff's Department reflect the gender and ethnic diversity of the community it serves?
Well, I'll absolutely pledge that any and all new hires will reflect the diversity of the actual inmate population at the county jail. I think that's extremely important. I'll look to innovative recruitment processes whereby I go to different organizations seeking people of color to take positions within the jail, not just correction officer positions, but positions within the hierarchy of the jail setting. Extremely important. Like that, I'll have an individual assigned specifically for any and all racial discrimination claims that inmates may have. And I'll also put forth a process by which those claims and accusations can be vetted and as publicly as possible. So those are some of the steps that I'd take.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Mr. McDermott, same question. If elected, what steps would you take to make the Sheriff's Department reflect the gender and ethnic diversity of the community it serves?
Well, as I mentioned before, the hiring of a chief diversity officer is paramount to this. I have experience over the last 18 years working in the trial court, and I got to say we've evolved a lot in our operations from a diversity standpoint. We hired a chief diversity officer in the trial court that assures that each division in the trial court is properly diversified amongst racial equality and gender equality. I've had the experience doing that. We've transformed the Norfolk Probate and Family Court over the last 18 years with new hiring techniques that really focus on individuals to make sure that our trial court is set up in a way that reflects our community. And I think that's really important, both in the corrections officers as well as the non-uniform personnel at the courthouse. But we need diversity training. We certainly need sensitivity training. There's some hard conversations that occur when you diversify your workforce. I have the experience because I've already done it in the trial court, and I'll bring that experience to Norfolk County Sheriff's Office.
Thank you, Ms. McDermott. Mr. Coughlin, same question. Would you like me to repeat it?
No, that's okay. That's okay. As sheriff, I would lead the cause in promoting diversity within the jail. Obviously, your civilian and uniformed staff should be representative of your prison population. I would go out and advertise. I would go out and meet, go to colleges, go to elementary, middle schools, high schools. You have to promote your business and get out there and show people what a great job it is. It's a career. You can have a career in corrections. There's room for advancement. So that would be something. Obviously, you have a staff member who would be assigned with you, but as sheriff, I would be hands-on that. I would be out in the community myself, promoting the sheriff's office and trying to diversify the people that work up the jail. It's a no-brainer.
Thank you, Mr. Coughlin. We are now on our rebuttal round. So candidates will have 1 minute to clarify or rebut any earlier discussion. You have 1 minute each to respond or react to issues raised thus far in the forum. We will start with you, Mr. McDermott.
So I just want to expand on the fact that, what the specific programs that I'm looking to focus on as the sheriff. I want to work with our communities to increase public safety for all. We're going to make the Norfolk County Sheriff's Office the Chief Public Safety Officer, bringing together community groups and municipalities to develop community-based approaches to public safety issues. We'll develop a countywide community online resource center to connect residents to the public health and safety resources. I want to serve as a countywide hub when public health and safety crises arise. I want to expand and identify new community partnerships to expand the effectiveness of existing programs like our Yellow Dot program and the Are You OK program for seniors, and create additional avenues to serve Norfolk County residents. We need to seek out diverse perspectives on community corrections. We need to figure out how best to reduce recidivism. I think I'm the best man for that position, and I look forward to working on that.
Thank you, Ms. McDermott. Mr. Coughlin? Mr. Coughlin, please unmute, Mr. Coughlin.
Sorry, getting back to the training, I would seek the assistance of the National Institute of Corrections to come in and do an audit on all the training in the jail, so we have the most up-to-date and best training. On the treatment side of things, I would, as I said before, we need a separate unit for the mentally ill people. Programs for alcohol and drug and substance use disorders. I believe those are diseases. So obviously we need the best programs inside the jail, and also the partnership with our colleagues outside the jail to get them the best treatment programs they can have, because that's what's going to stop them from reoffending and reduce recidivism. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Coughlin. Mr. Phelan, please unmute.
Certainly. At first, I wanted to just explain my answer to another question about the current situation. You know, the population of the jail went from approximately 450 to 300 inmates due to the COVID situation. And there hasn't been a huge outcry concerning the safety of the community relative to those individuals that were released from the Norfolk County House of Correction. That should be the norm. That should carry on. The less people in jail, the better. The more people getting treatment for substance use disorders and mental health treatment, the better. And you're saving taxpayers money. But I'll use the office primarily. I think the first priority is really to confront the racial disparities that pervade our criminal justice system. You know, racial equity is law enforcement's most critical challenge today. And I accept that challenge, and I'll be a sheriff that will take it on.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. We are on to question number 9. We will start with Mr. Coughlin. If elected, what programs would you implement in the area of healthcare, including treatment of mental health and substance use disorders?
Well, as I said before, I believe that the Norfolk County Jail should have a separate housing unit just for people with mental illness. I don't think it's fair that you're integrating mentally ill inmates with inmates who are there for substance use treatment. They should be separate. We need to have more halfway house beds. We need staff in the sheriff's office to be hired to work directly during classification to try and persuade and show an inmate that they need to seek treatment as opposed to sitting the 90 days in jail. We need a sheriff staff member over at the courts full-time working with probation to speak to these people when they come into the courts and say, hey, your best thing for you is for treatment. Let's get you into a treatment program right away, as opposed to just sitting in jail for 90 days. These are the things that are important to me.
Thank you, Mr. Coughlin. Mr. McDermott, same question. If elected, what programs would you implement in the area of healthcare, including treatment of mental health and substance use disorders?
Thank you. And addiction and mental health issues are pervasive through the jail system, unfortunately. I think one of the things we have to make sure is an investment in our healthcare system within the jail. Certainly Norfolk County Correctional Facility has fantastic staff there willing to work with our inmate population on their healthcare issues. We got to make sure, though, however, and I think it's a federal problem that's going on, that a lot of these inmates don't have health insurance when they leave the jail. And so they don't qualify for a lot of programs that are available to them after they get out of incarceration. So I believe that we need to make sure that while they're in the prison, that they have the tools and the resources for proper health care, but also have access to health care programs outside of after incarceration. I also want to focus on diversion programs before and after incarceration. As a trial court member, we created specialty courts like the drug court and the mental health court. And I'll expand the opportunities for our inmates to participate in those programs so that they can better have success outside of the jail.
Thank you, Mr. McDermott. Mr. Phelan.
Thank you. You know, a good program, Department of Mental Health actually implemented a $2 million diversion program that saved $2 million in the first 4 months upon implementation due to less incarcerated people to begin with. That's really the way to go. I'm particularly interested, however, in the emerging adult population, ages 18 to 26. These folks' brains are still developing. Research shows that their recidivism rate is higher, their sentences are longer, but the research also shows that they're more open to treatment. I'd like to segregate that population. You know, people might be considered juveniles by the law when they're 17 years old, but science tells you their brains continue to develop until they're 26. We should be really taking a close look at that. Also, women who are incarcerated experience much higher levels of mental health issues and trauma than men. I'd like to take a look at that as well.
Edna, you're on mute.
Thank you very much. So we have another question from our Zoom audience, and we will start with you, Mr. Phelan. All of you have spoken about introducing many programs. What would be the budgetary implications of these programs, and where would the funding come from?
You know, as I said, a perfect example is the diversion program that I spoke to. $2 million, Department of Health, Mental Health invested and saved $2 million in the first 4 months. Research also shows that for every dollar invested in education, you save $5 in reduced recidivism. So we have to get smart with our spending. We really do, and we have to think outside the box. Now, everybody says that. I understand that, but it's really setting your priorities. Your budget is outlined in your priorities. I outlined my priorities very clearly in my platform that everybody can read. If it doesn't, the expenditure doesn't go towards one of those goals of making providing a continuum of care before, during, and after incarceration with dignity and respect, then we don't spend the money on it. And that's the way it goes. Whether it's something like a Are You OK project for seniors, or it's other programs for youth. We have to take a close look at what our objectives are.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Mr. Coughlin, same question. All of you have spoken about introducing many programs. What would be the budgetary implications of these programs, and where would the funding come from?
Well, first of all, I would do a staffing study to see where the staff is. With the reduced inmate population, I would do a staffing study, try to save money on that front. Number two, I would hire a full-time a grant writer, because I think grants are very important. We can get resources that way. Number three, trying to create better partnerships with the halfway housings in colleges, and also instituting a more robust mentor program. We need to go out and we need to recruit the inmates, reformed inmates who have been through this situation, who know what's going on. We need to get them involved and to counsel and support the inmates that are re-entering society, because number one, they're going to have credibility and they've been through it, and we need mentors, volunteer mentors, more of them.
Thank you, Mr. Coughlin. Mr. McDermott?
Well, I mean, this is basically a budget crisis. I think that we don't really fully understand the impact that COVID-19 has had on us. I mean, the legislature alone haven't passed a permanent budget for fiscal year 21. And so we need to make sure that our budget is set in stone. The Norfolk County Jail is operating at a fiscal deficit, and I think you need somebody with a background in the legislative affairs to advocate properly with the legislature for proper funding. We are going to do a stem to stern review of all of the programs at the Norfolk Jail. as well as a staffing analysis. And I'm going to make sure that we put metrics in place to make sure that the programs we have there that are costing money are working. And for those that aren't working, we aren't going to have them anymore. So we're going to have a reduction in programs most likely at the start, especially under this fiscal crisis. I'll work with the legislature with my background working in the House and the Senate to make sure that Norfolk County Correction Facility gets the proper funding it deserves.
Thank you, Mr. McDermott. Question number 11. We will start with you, Mr. McDermott. According to the WBUR report in 2020, a majority of the county houses of correction detainees are jailed pre-trial because they cannot pay for bail. Are there alternatives to incarceration for those who cannot afford bail? If so, what alternatives would you support?
Yeah, that's a great question. As a former prosecutor, I argued for bail quite a bit back in Boston Municipal Court. We need bail reform. I've spoken with several of the members of the legislature about bail reform. Far too many people are given high bails that they can't afford. And sometimes bail is used abusively for punishment purposes. And bail should only be to secure that person's appearance in court. We need to certainly focus on diversion opportunities, whether it's an expansion of our bracelet program with working with probation. There is a bracelet program in the Norfolk County Jail that should be expanded, but also the Commissioner of Probation's office has a bracelet program that can release people on their own recognizance. But we need to get more creative with our court system, focusing on diversion programs, drug courts, veterans courts, mental health courts. I've had the experience doing that, and I'll make sure we invest in the future in those programs.
Thank you, Mr. McDermott. Mr. Phelan, same question.
Yeah, I've been a big proponent of bail reform from the get-go. It's part of my platform, and I believe strongly in it. The bail system as it is now is not fair. It's not fair to people of color. It's not fair to people who are not wealthy. There's really two systems. You know, I know the League of Women Voters were strong advocates for bail reform. Unfortunately, it didn't make its way into the crime bill of 2018. It should have, no question about it. Another way as sheriff in my platform that I outlined that we can address this situation is providing somewhat of mini programs after people are held pre-trial by judges on bail. We can provide them with counseling and a certificate so that they would be allowed to go back to court and seek bail reviews and get released based upon their accomplishment within the jail during that pretrial incarceration. But bail reform is necessary. It's time. Let's get it going.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Mr. Coughlin, same question.
Well, my beliefs are nonviolent criminal offenders should not have to be incarcerated at all. These are the people that we need to put back out in society, nonviolent criminal offenders, because that's how we help them and stop recidivism. Bail is about being a flight risk. Your bail is set because you are a flight risk, meaning you're not going to show up for court. So nobody should be discriminated against because of lack of funds or not having any money where they can't make bail. Obviously, you have a dangerousness hearing where if you're a violent criminal offender, you're going to have a high bail because you're a threat to public safety. But any nonviolent criminal offender who can't afford to be bailed because they don't have the money is not right. It needs to be fixed.
Thank you, Mr. Coughlin. This will be our last question, and we will start with you, Mr. Coughlin. The question is, how would you support programs to encourage eligible detainees, that is those who have not been convicted of a felony, to vote?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't hear that.
Okay. How would you support programs to encourage eligible detainees, that is those who have not been convicted of a felony, to vote? Like, how would you support the programs to, incentivize?
Well, I support it 100%. You're guilty until proven innocent. If you're pre-trial, you haven't been convicted or sentenced to anything. You absolutely should have the right to vote. I would make sure I would I didn't even think that was a thing. I think I would work on getting those people that right to vote, especially if you're being held pre-trial. You're innocent until proven guilty. You should be able to vote, even if you're being held in prison. Look what they're doing now with COVID, with the mail-in ballots. Everybody in the Commonwealth getting a mail-in ballot. So I don't see why they couldn't do that with the Department of Corrections.
Thank you, Mr. Coughlin. Mr. Phelan, same question.
Yeah, it's a great question. While they certainly have the right to vote, many of them don't choose to vote, and that's unfortunate. That's where community involvement should play a large role. We should be partnering with community groups such as the League of Women Voters and others that would come into the jail and help inmates enroll to vote. A lot of them don't have access to computers to reach out to the Secretary of State's office to request an absentee ballot. We have to make sure that that happens. It's not just a matter that they have the right to do it. We have to make sure that they have access to do it. And I think community groups partnering with the sheriff's office is a good way to do that. It helps the inmates, it helps the community, and it's a healthy interaction for a good cause between the community and the inmates.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Mr. McDermott.
Thank you. Yeah, as this is a fundamental issue that all of our inmates need to be educated on. And Bill mentioned before about the volume of young offenders that are serving time at the House of Correction, 18 to 34 years old, that generally don't feel as though they have any hope. Unfortunately, civics lessons, were wiped out through our educational system. We need to reinstitute those things. And if we have to start it with educating our folks at the jail about the value of votes, the importance of voting, how to register to vote, how to actively engage in the electoral process, I think that's inspiring for folks that might have otherwise given up on hope. I look at candidates, including the three of us that are running here today and the current sheriff. We're all activists within our community, and I think we need to inspire these inmates about the value of the vote and making sure that they exercise the right to vote, to make sure that they, in fact, feel as though they have an impact on the change that we need in society.
Unmute yourself.
You're muted.
Sorry. We will now finish with our closing statements in reverse order of the opening statements, starting with you, Mr. Phelan.
Okay. I'm running for Norfolk County Sheriff because I want to help people who are suffering. Many people have been hurt by the opiate crisis, the vast untreated mental health problems. People who struggle with these issues wind up in court and in jail. As sheriff, I'll provide a continuum of services delivered with compassion and dignity before, during, and after incarceration. This will reduce recidivism. As a candidate for a law enforcement job, I think it's important for me to recognize the systemic racism that pervades the criminal justice system. Systemic racism means that we have institutions that produce racially disparate outcomes, regardless of the good intentions of the people who work within them. I support Black Lives Matter. I also support good policing, and these things are not mutually exclusive. Ending systemic racism is today's most critical law enforcement challenge, and I accept that challenge. I'm a lawyer by training, and I've served as a mayor, a school committee member, and a town administrator. I know how to make institutional change while staying within a budget. I'm also a husband, a father of 4, and a volunteer mentor to at-risk youth. I have seen the power of second chances in people's lives. I'm Bill Phelan, and I ask for your vote on September 1st. Remember, mail in for Phelan. Thank you very much for tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Mr. McDermott, your closing statement. You have 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. Lasting change requires us to raise our standards. We need firm resolution to compel that change. We need a leader that's willing to actively engage, listen, and coordinate to develop an action plan. Look, prevention, intervention, education, and hope. Those are the keys to a safer, stronger Norfolk County. We have an opportunity to envision a new role for the Norfolk County Sheriff's Office. I'm running for sheriff because I believe it's time that the role be one of coordinating public safety across the county and changing our understanding of what public safety actually means. To me, it's more about putting people in jail. It has to be, and we all know it. Public safety means creating an environment where everybody in our community feels safe to live, grow, and to thrive. Whether it's the opioid crisis and the influx in crime associated with it, a natural disaster, or a public health emergency like COVID, the Sheriff's Office can and should be a part of the answer. I want to thank the League of Women Voters of Needham for giving me this opportunity to share my vision with you tonight. If you want to learn more about my campaign and find ways to get involved, please visit patrickmcdermott.org or my Facebook page, which is Patrick McDermott for Sheriff. With your help, we can create a safer, more secure Norfolk County for everyone. And I humbly ask for your vote, Patrick McDermott, on September 1st. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDermott. Mr. Coughlin.
Yes, thank you. First, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for tonight. I really enjoyed participating, and I truly appreciate the opportunity. If you want public safety over politics, I'm your candidate. I have a professional law enforcement background, 29 years. I've held supervisory managerial positions in the state police. I've worked with all the different branches of the courts, law enforcement, probation, parole. I am your candidate. I can professionalize the sheriff's office. I have instant credibility with all the chiefs of police in Norfolk County. On the other hand, I've dealt with the criminal offender for 29 years. I understand that a lot of them have mental illness, substance use disorders. I want them to get the help they need. I will be heavily involved in that. I truly believe that the nonviolent criminal offender does not need to necessarily be sitting in a jail cell. We need to get them into the programs, out into the community, get them educated, get them a job, and give them continued support in order to watch and see that they don't recidivize. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm on www.coughlin2020.com is my website, and I'm also Coughlin 2020 on Facebook. And again, I thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you. And a big thank you to the candidates for your willingness to support in our forum. We wish you all good luck with the election. And thank you to our Zoom and live stream audiences. A recording of this forum will be available on the Needham channel and the League of Women Voters websites. The primary election is September the 1st. The deadline to register to vote for this election is August 22nd. In addition to an in-person voting on election day, vote by mail ballots may be requested through August 26th. And an in-person early voting is August 22nd through the 28th, August 28th. Visit the Massachusetts Secretary of the Commonwealth website for details. The League of Women Voters Comprehensive Voter Guide, Vote 411, includes the information of all the primary offices and will include candidate responses to early questions in early August. The leagues in Norfolk County thank the Needham channel for streaming the forum and the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts for the use of its Zoom account. Thank you again for joining us, and remember to vote on or before September 1st. Good night, everyone.